Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
We are back at our home studio here, and we are not able yet to get our team safely back into the broadcast radio studio, but we're totally live right now. I'm actually going to get into the chat, take some of your questions that way for Facebook, for Periscope, for those of you watching on YouTube. So this is not being broadcast to our 1,000+ radio stations or Sirius XM, but we still wanted to come for about a half hour, a little bit less, and update you today on the latest news. I'm joined by Than Bennett, our Director of Government Affairs. Let me encourage you first to share this with your friends and family, because the only place you're going to get this information today, you're not going to get it on your radio station. You're not going to get it on Sirius XM. You're going to get it right here through this live broadcast that we're doing via Facebook and YouTube, and Periscope. So however you're viewing this right now, and we're live, it's noon Eastern time, or maybe just a little bit later than that now, share this with your friends and family. However you are viewing the broadcast. I want to get right into the news. Got my computer set up right here. So there's a smoking gun kind of came out yesterday, again, which speaks to why John Durham is still on the case. And remember, the Biden administration has not removed him as special counsel. They have let him continue to do his work. We've got a new email, actually, about, and this is in January 27th, from Jim Comey to Jim Clapper, the very end of the Obama administration, January 2017. And what James Comey is saying is that we're not able to sufficiently corroborate the reporting in the Steele Dossier, and he sent that to James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, but we don't want to tell people that we can't use it. And so he had some concerns about specifically Clapper's statement. So it would, in the final days, the Clapper was going to say the intelligence community has not made any judgment that the information in the Steele Dossier is reliable. But Comey tried to push back, suggesting Steele was deemed reliable, even though he had just said that. So he was trying to get the back off him. He cares a lot about language. He had just told Clapper that they're not able to sufficiently corroborate the reporting. Now, I want to get into this later in the week with Rick Rennell, when we can get everybody back on, our special advisor for national security and foreign policy. But as you know, Jim Comey ultimately signs off on a FISA, with the Steele Dossier being the main reason why this FISA was granted, using that information. Even on the same moments, he's telling the Director of National Intelligence, we can't corroborate anything in here from this bogus, what we now know as a bogus dossier. And I want to bring in Than Bennett, our Director of Government Affairs in Washington, D.C., because Than, this speaks to a lot of our work that we're doing right now. And we also know John Durham still on this case more than a year and a half into his appointment. Now he's a special counsel. And looking at all these different parts of how the Russia hoax began.
Yeah, Jordan, this is one of the reasons where I really hope that James Comey doesn't fade from public view, because, look, I still think there's an awful lot of accountability to be had at really a lot of different layers in the FBI, but particularly former Director James Comey. Remember, this is a guy that spied on an American citizen. He did it for a political agenda. I think we can state that as conclusive fact now. He did it using information that he knew at the time to be unverified. And before this revelation today, Jordan, it certainly looked like he did it while lying to the FISA court about whether or not that information was reliable. Now we know that is true, because in this email that you just read, he says to James Clapper that we're not able to sufficiently corroborate the reporting, and yet he pushes for the FBI to actually present to the FISA court as if they can corroborate it, because, you know, they've used Christopher Steele in the past and maybe some of that information has been reliable. But Jordan, that is not how you put together evidence and present it to a court. The evidence itself, that specific evidence, has to be corroborated, has to be reliable. They could not corroborate it in this case, and yet James Comey was pushing for the FISA court to be presented as otherwise. And Jordan, there's a couple of different things in the timeline here that maybe I want to throw out there eventually, but I just want to remind people right at the outset, this was a FISA application, the first renewal of Carter Page that James Comey signed. It was also one that Sally Yates signed. So all of the similar players that I really think were in this scheme together were involved. And this middle of January 2017 phase really seemed to be the point where they decided they were going to go to the FISA court. And no matter whether or not they could corroborate the evidence, they were going to push forward anyway. They were going to do anything it took to spy on that incoming administration.
And it goes back to how they were caught lying to the FISA court, doctoring evidence. And then this is another instance where in the same day he's signing off on a FISA warrant to renew Carter Page, which they know, they've been told by the CIA, Carter Page is no Russia asset. In fact, he's a U.S. asset that you're about to burn. Why are you burning one of our assets? Because of Trump derangement syndrome. We have to go after Donald Trump in all means necessary. We have to have a backup plan in case he wins the election, which he did in 2016. So we'll throw it all against the wall. We'll all those books of courage he wrote and justice and higher honor, what a bunch of junk. I mean, he literally signed off on a warrant to renew a warrant on a U.S. citizen, and contained in that warrant was information from a dossier, the Steele Dossier, that he, on the same day signed, said to James Clapper, the head of the Director of National Intelligence, we are not able to sufficiently corroborate the reporting to include it in the body of the report. So they wouldn't include it in the public report, but they were going to include it in the secret court filing and signed off on it as verified. I know we already have a question coming in. Carr on YouTube. What happens now to Comey? Than, I think this goes back to John Durham. Not, a lot of us feared. I think Bill Barr feared as well that John Durham, even if he was made special counsel, could be removed by the Biden administration on day one. He wasn't, so he's been able to continue to do his work, which means there is a lot there. I mean, he's been really going after this for over a year. He's asked for additional resources. He's partitioned off pieces of this to different U.S. attorneys, but he's still on this case.
He is. And one of the reasons that we're pressing members of Congress in both the House and the Senate to keep visibility on this, Jordan, because I still think there's a risk that John Durham would be taken off the case by the Biden administration. And there is so much evidence here that still merits attention and ultimately needs to come to conclusion. And look, in addition to the information we're talking about today, Jordan, this is one of the reasons that our lawsuit looking at the Comey spies inside the Trump White House continues to push forward as well. Remember, those were intelligence assets that were sent from the FBI over to the Trump White House. And normally when something like that happens, the chain of command, the final loyalty or the final reporting then shifts to the White House so that asset can give the President of the United States unfiltered and unvarnished advice. That didn't happen in this case. That asset was still reporting back to James Comey at the FBI. And the reason I bring that up now is because as John Durham continues to look at all of this, I think it's very important for the full picture of what James Comey was trying to do is made plain to the American public and to anybody looking at this. I really think, Jordan, this was a comprehensive effort involving a number of different layers to undermine the incoming administration, all at the hands, or not all at the hands, but certainly much of it at the hands of the director of the FBI. It's something that shouldn't be tolerated. And quite honestly, in my view, the biggest effort we have here is to make sure it never happens again. Because if everybody involved with this, all the way up to James Comey, gets away with it without accountability, Jordan, I don't know why we wouldn't think that it wouldn't happen again. I think it most certainly would.
Yeah, if they just keep writing books and going on MSNBC or CNN, signing up contributorships to bash President Trump still, to bash his former administration. And we'll get to a story still because President Trump, they cannot give up on him. A member of Congress has now joined with the NAACP in filing a lawsuit against President Trump in connection to January 6th. We'll talk about that in a minute. The idea that even after an impeachment, even after you have all these U.S. attorneys and district attorneys going after President Trump as we speak, that even members of Congress, Democrats, they cannot give up on the idea of putting Donald Trump front and center. And maybe that's because Republicans are still in polls, for the most part, saying they want him to run again. They're saying he's the most important president, most important person in the Republican Party. They're saying he's the best president ever. That poll came out. And I think some of that, again, goes to, recent memories that people have. But the economy was good. It was strong. Then we were hit with COVID, but we were responding to that. And then we got hit with this crazy new election system that came out of nowhere that really, I think, was why we saw Donald Trump end up being defeated. Ultimately was because of the way the elections were run. I'm not saying it's fraud, but it certainly, these state legislatures have got to boost up their laws, because they have laws on the books saying, hey, the executive branch, judicial branch can't change our voting laws, and yet it was allowed to happen. So that's got to be done before the midterms. But I don't want to get too far down that hole, because Than, you were talking about this. We were talking about this before we went live with everybody, and I encourage everybody to share this right now. This is what you're going to get live from us today at the American Center for Law and Justice and on Sekulow, is specifically because of the ice storms and snowstorms across the country. We can't get our team in safely to the studio. So this is the way to see our live reporting. You won't get that on the radio stations right now or on SiriusXM. You will get good content that way. But this is the live content where we can take your questions and comments while we're on with you through Facebook and YouTube and Periscope. So share it now with your friends and family. I encourage you to share this, because this is information you're not going to get in the mainstream media right now. It's great reporting from John Solomon at Just the News. I do David Brody's program there almost every week for Just the News, the water cooler, and that's part of that team. And John Solomon does great reporting, and he's not letting it go. But then you talked about how this connects directly to the work we're doing right now at the ACLJ. Tell people about that.
Yeah, a couple of things, Jordan. First of all, the most direct tie right now is our ongoing FOIA, Freedom of Information Act lawsuit involving the FBI assets that were sent over to the White House under the direction of James Comey. And again, I just want to elaborate on this just a minute, because I think it's important to understand that that kind of transfer to a White House to give a new president counsel on intelligent matters, that part is fairly common. But when that happens, a very important thing happens. The loyalty, not the chain of command, that's the best way to describe it, shifts from inside the FBI over to the White House. So that asset responds only to the White House. He's independent of the FBI, independent of the Department of Justice, and gives unfiltered advice to the president. When James Comey sent that asset over to the White House, that asset continued to report back to the FBI, to James Comey, a wholly inappropriate use of that. We are engaged in a lawsuit right now to find out all of the communication that happened and how that played into the effort to undermine the incoming administration. We're in the production phase of that right now, Jordan. So we're getting documents involved with James Comey's communication with those assets, and we're gonna find out how it played in. And the other thing that I want to mention on this, Jordan, we talked about January 12th, 2017. That's when this new email that the smoking gun is reported. That's when it was sent. Jordan, that was the same day that both Joe Biden and Jacob Lew presented a request to unmask someone inside the incoming administration. It turned out to be Michael Flynn. So I only bring that up to say this goes to the highest levels of the new administration, and we don't know exactly where all of it is going to lead, but we're committed in that lawsuit to find out who the players were, where they were positioned, and how they fit together. And I've got to tell you, we know an awful lot. I think we know enough that James Comey should probably be worried, but I'm pretty confident there's a lot more to come.
Absolutely. And so we're going to keep following this. I told you we're going to bring in Rick Grinnell hopefully later in the week when some of the ice starts melting away. We get our team back in the studio so we can get everybody connected. But we are, again, going to get more into this. The fact that Jim Comey, on the same day he signed off on a FISA warrant of an American citizen saying that this information in the Steele Dossier was verified, he was telling Jim Clapper, who was serving the same position Rick Grinnell served in as Director of National Intelligence, and saying that we can't corroborate this information. So that shouldn't have been in a FISA warrant. Let me, again, I just want to, I think it's important now to kind of update you, because a lot of people thought, okay, impeachment over, President Trump can kind of move on to rebuilding, his political apparatus. We know he wants to, have an effect in 2022, not just against the incumbents who voted against him, but also to help just generally the Republican Party take back the House and the Senate and then potentially run again. He hasn't made that decision yet. He's got time to do that. But he's still the most popular person within the Republican Party. And I think the strongest figure when it comes to fundraising, getting out the vote, getting people excited again. And I know he also wants to get involved and fund real efforts at the state level to get our voting laws working again, so that we're not disenfranchising anyone, but that we have a secure voting system so that no one feels like it's not worth it. I think the voting system's rigged against us. We don't want anybody to feel that way, right or wrong. So we know we need to make reforms. But President Trump is under legal attack. I mean, I'll tell you from as a member of his legal team, keep repeating this in every interview I do on Newsmax since the impeachment. I said, this is not over for President Trump, though it's great to be done with the impeachment for the country, and these won't get as much attention. You've got the NAACP, along with Democrat Congressman Benny Thompson, suing President Trump, alleging that he incited the Capitol riot on January 6th in violation of the Reconstruction-era law. It's commonly referred to as the Ku Klux Klan Act. So he is now this has been filed in federal district court in Washington, D.C., and it comes after the acquittal. It also names one of our good friends, Mayor Giuliani, and says that President Trump's directly tied to these Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. And again, to me, what this shows, I want you all to understand this, is that President Trump, who, as Lindsey Graham said, is key. He called it Trump plus, is how the Republican Party needs to kind of reform. It's like, you got to keep in all those Trump voters. You cannot lose what he's brought to the party. And then you keep adding people. And you say, look at the policies. Look past look past personalities. Look at the policies that already the Biden administration is trying to put in place, whether it is a minimum wage, which may sound nice at $15 an hour, but go out to a lot of parts of the country, and that means people will just lose their jobs. Employers won't be able to afford that minimum wage. So what may work in New York City is not going to necessarily work in the Midwest or in Middle America. And of course, this is how the Democrats continually operate. They forget about Middle America. They forget about, they just go coastal, and they forget about the rest of the country. But you see these lawsuits against the president, former president. They are not giving up, Than. And to me, I think it's a dangerous path. On the one hand, they want to tie Republicans to President Trump, and they think, well, it's right on the line whether Americans like President Trump or not. But usually you give a couple years, and the American people start looking back on policies more than the person. And they're going to see that if the Biden administration gets its way on anything, think about the fact that right now you've got all of the wind power. You're having to keep that going, use helicopters fueled by gasoline, who are spraying an oil-based substance that you've also got to get through that to keep the wind power machines going, because of all this wild ice storm that's hit 70% of the country right now, covered in snow. And again, it's just, the idea is, it's like they want to keep him front and center, so they're going to bring these lawsuits, try to make his life miserable. But I think that's a dangerous line to walk. It only works if the Republican Party in mass rejects President Trump, or it divides the party. But in my mind, it might unite the party around the policies of the president. It won't be the president who's on the ballot in 2022. They want it to be him, I think, but it won't be in those swing districts. It will be the candidate and the policies.
Yeah, a couple of things, Jordan. First of all, on your point about as America tries to get back to work, and companies that were forced to shut down, small businesses that had to shut down, as they try to bring workers back on, this additional layer of regulations, whether it's an increased minimum wage for first entry level rung workers, or whether it's emission regulations, whatever it may be, Jordan, that will slow down the return to work. And one of the things that I've been hearing recently outside of the Beltway across the country is that people are really desperate to return to work in a full fashion. And the kind of things that you're mentioning are the things that are going to slow that process down. But then if you look at it through the political lens, to get to your second point, this is something we talked about on yesterday's broadcast, and I really do think it's front and center now. I think if you rewound about a month, I think probably the Democrat Party was in a little bit of a good position, because there was a lot of fracturing on the right, and a lot of it did center around whether or not you were pro-Trump or anti-Trump inside the party. Jordan, I think if you look at it today, I think that dynamic has flipped. I really do. I think the impeachment process was pushed too far, and now you've got this new effort led by Benny Thompson in the House to sue Donald Trump, even though he's already subject to regular prosecution according to the laws of the land. Congress already had their shot. The House impeached, the Senate acquitted, Jordan, and yet they cannot let it go. So I think that dynamic has flipped, and I think the Democrat Party runs a risk heading into 2022 of their own actions actually unifying the Republican Party more than the Republican Party may have been able to do so on its own. So, that's a political dynamic that then feeds into the policy point you're talking about. But I think that the last few weeks have seen a dramatic shift in the favor of Republicans. Quite frankly, it wasn't running in their favor a month ago, right, and I think it probably is now.
There's another story I want to get to, and this is one we're going to certainly analyze later in the week as well. And I want to let people know that this foreign policy, we're going to really have to watch of the Biden administration, especially when it comes to an area of the world which became much more peaceful, and we were signing peace deals as a country with a Gulf state, predominantly Sunni Muslim countries, and Israel and the United States, bilateral deals, trilateral deals. We're seeing in Serbia and Kosovo, as well in North Africa, in places that used to harbor the worst of the worst terrorists who wanted to target the U.S. and did target the U.S. are now part of these deals. But now you've got an administration that wants to get back into the Iranian nuclear deal. They're trying to figure out a way in. They're a little nervous right now, though, because in a new report by the IAEA, so through the UN watchdog, this is, so again, if you want to, it is not coming from some conservative, reporting, that Iran's uranium metal production is, quote, the most serious nuclear step to date. They think the deal could still be saved, but it's interesting here. This is the most serious nuclear steps that they've taken. A former Obama administration official has said it's very provocative, and that they describe the news as there's no credible civilian use for uranium metal. Both the UK, France, and Germany, and all supporters of the JCPOA, said in January that Iran has no credible use, not at all, to be making this uranium metal. And they describe the news as deeply concerning and with grave military implications. So, I think, Than, it's a really bad policy when the Europeans don't buy what Iran is trying to sell, even though, as we've talked about with Rick so many times, the Europeans are dying to do business with Iran and for the U.S. to lift sanctions on Iran. The Biden administration so far has not lifted those sanctions, and it's not said they're going to rush right back into the deal like they early kind of indicated that they wanted to do. And it looks like Iran is going to make it tougher. The question is, will ultimately the U.S. and the Biden administration fold?
Yeah, and even if you look at it through the rosiest colored glasses, Jordan, the JCPOA, the Iran deal, at its very best, was only ever a pause on Iran's ability to enrich and pursue weapons. And now with the same exact team coming back into power that crafted the deal in the first place, led by Jake Sullivan, Ben Rhodes, and others, Jordan, I think the Europeans are correct, but I think what Iran knows at this point is, no matter what they do, they're going to have an audience with this administration that is very unlikely to tighten the screws on them. And so, I think the best thing that the Congress could do, quite frankly, is try to reassert some strong oversight that, quite frankly, both parties abdicated the last time that the deal was being authored. But I think we've got to look at this with clear eyes here. This administration, Jordan, from the very beginning, the exact path that they wanted on this was appeasement. They did not want strong oversight. So I really think we're going to have to look to the legislative branch. I don't think there's a whole lot of hope, to be quite honest with you, that the executive branch is going to have any desire to look at it.
It's interesting because Iran's officials say, well, we can roll this back, but you've got to roll back the sanctions first. The Biden administration saying you have to go into compliance with the JCPOA, which is still a path to a nuclear weapon. It's no good. Still a path to a nuclear weapon. You've got to do that first. So they're in negotiations with Iran right now about how to get back into this deal, which I think Joe Biden and his team really do want. They want to be back at the deal, having, tea with Zarif from Iran and working with those Iranian leaders across tables and going to places like Geneva and having their their meetings and of their elites and European elites. But at the same time, it looks like right now, which is a good thing, I think, for our country, they're not rushing in. But remember, even if this all was done, this deal still puts Iran on a path to a nuclear weapon. And what was interesting to me, Than, is that, yes, the U.S. pulled out and put sanctions on Iran, but the JCPOA continued with the other countries, and they did nothing but protest. They didn't stop. They didn't pull out of the deal because they wanted to keep making the money that they could around U.S. sanctions, which we talked about before, how they do that. And even though they know Iran was out front is saying we're not in compliance anymore with it.
Yeah, absolutely, Jordan. And look, you mentioned the European countries just a moment ago. They become even more important now that the U.S. Is under the direction of a policy led by Joe Biden, because I think you can expect the United States to take a weaker view on the deal. But there's other countries that are involved, including, it's not just the 6 countries that signed the deal, Jordan. It's the others that are trading partners with those European countries. They are going to have a real impact on this. And honestly, this is why a lot of our attention is now shifting to some of those international bodies, including the Security Council, because while we will continue to press the case with the U.S. administration, Jordan, I mean, we have to do it with eyes wide open, right? I mean, if this is essentially a repeat of the administration that crafted the deal in the first place, you're going to have a limited audience there. So while you do want to expose their motives, you do have to look for other opportunities around the world. And that includes the Security Council, includes the other signatories on the deal. And Jordan, Iran might get some relief from the United States, but if it starts seeing sanctions from the other parties involved, it might be able to fill the void a little.
I think what's interesting, too, I want to go back to this. So we now know, just to kind of recap what we went through today, and we're going to be looking into all this further. Jim Comey, on the one hand, he's telling James Clapper right at the end of the Obama administration, we can't corroborate anything in the Steele dossier. Same time, he signs off on a renewal of a FISA warrant on an American citizen that the CIA already told him was a U.S. asset, not a Russian asset, a U.S. asset, that they were blowing his cover. They didn't care because they wanted to go after Trump, signing off on a FISA application warrant renewal that had the dossier in it as verified. So Jim Comey has got to answer for that, whether he's answering to that to Durham and his investigators, or to ultimately congressional investigators, remains to be seen. But this is just breaking. And I wanted to make sure we came on again live today for our Facebook, YouTube audience, Periscope audience, even though we couldn't broadcast on our regular terrestrial radio or Sirius XM because of the storms gripping the country right now. We just could not safely get our team in, and we care about that, of course, is make sure that they're safe to get into the studio. I hope we can get back in tomorrow. If not, we'll be right back here with you again for at least a half hour, talking about all the news that's not getting reported. And this is kind of going back to that time, now that we're through the impeachment, where, and Than, I think we play that critical role where this kind of news doesn't make it out there into the mainstream media, because you got a first it was impeachment, then it was a snowstorm, and they won't want to cover Jim Comey. They won't want to cover Carter Page. They now have those people on, those bad actors like McCabe, on as their contributors at CNN.
Yeah, no matter how far we go, Jordan, it just always seems there's one more shoe to drop. And I think the picture is starting to, well, I don't think it's starting to be complete. I think it's fairly complete on James Comey and his role here. But if I could, maybe as we close out, let me just tease one other thing that our listeners are going to hear about as we move forward. Now that the Senate has wrapped up impeachment, they're on recess this week. I know the COVID stimulus bill is coming down the pipeline. But Jordan, the other thing that we're going to have to start watching pretty closely are some of the nominations that are coming from Joe Biden. I know you talked with Rick Grinnell, and I won't belabor this, but about the new nominee to lead the CIA, Ambassador Bill Burns, someone who Rick was initially supportive of until it came out that it looks like he is beholden to China, has significant financial backing from China. That's going to be a concern for us. And the second one I just want to mention quickly is Javier Becerra, the Attorney General of California, to be the Secretary for Health and Human Services. Jordan, I think it's fair to say that this is the most devout pro-abortion on-demand nominee that the HHS has ever put forward. And that is saying something, given a department that had Secretary Kathleen Sebelius at its helm. So I know you are working with a coalition to express concerns to the Senate committee.
Yep.
That we'll be hearing that next week. That's going to be on the floor of the Senate here pretty soon, George. So those are just a couple of nominees that if we move forward, people are going to expect to hear more
where
about.
do those nominees stand for Secretary of State? Where does that enough for
HHS.
CIA for D&I? Where does that stand?
Yeah, for the Bill Burns for the CIA, that is still in the nomination phase. Probably the one that is more urgent is Javier Becerra. He'll be in committee likely next week, Jordan. But look, every indication that I'm hearing and that the team here is hearing is that they want to move it quickly to the floor. So you might only have 4, 5, 6 days between the committee hearing and a Senate vote. We're just going to have to watch it very carefully.
Yeah, we have to educate people about his policies, especially how anti-life he is, how against the pro-life movement he is. It's not even how pro-abortion he is. He also cannot stand the pro-life movement and pro-life pregnancy centers. Remember, this is the guy who has tried to go after those centers, like Kamala Harris, now the vice president, trying to go after those centers. Let me take a couple questions, and we'll wrap up for today. Let me encourage you, keep sharing this with your friends and family right now on Facebook, on YouTube, on Periscope. Here's why. 1, the show regenerates, and so it'll be up all day. 2, this is the way to get the live information from us today. Of course, we update you on social media and on our website at aclj.org. But a couple questions for you that have come in. DJ on YouTube, will Cassidy and Burr be primaried for their vote on impeachment? Well, here's one thing. Burr is not running again. So it won't matter. That'll be an open seat in North Carolina. And some people have talked about Laura Trump running for that seat. But the bigger news is that Cassidy was censured by the Louisiana Republican Party. So was Burr by the North Carolina Republican Party. But Cassidy just got reelected. So I mean, you have to remember this vote for 5.5 years.
Yeah, there are a lot of censures happening across the country, Jordan. And, I think this goes back to the conversation that we had. The Republican Party is going to have to decide what kind of nominees it puts forward. And they're going to have to put forward nominees that when it gets to a general can then unify both sides of the base. So I would just venture a prediction. I think there will be some instances where members like this that broke with the party involving the president probably will be primary, probably will be defeated, Jordan, and then we'll head into a general election, and their effort will then be to reunify the party. And then I think there will also be examples where some of these dissenters are primaried and emerge victorious, and then they will have to try to unify from the other side. And, at the end of the day, in a 50-50 Senate, no matter if your preferred primary candidate wins or loses, those races at the end of the day are very likely to determine whether you have Leader Schumer or Leader McConnell after 2022. So, that dynamic is going to play out in a primary. It's going to play out again in a general, and whoever unifies the best is going to emerge victorious. Final
question we'll take today from everybody. RC on YouTube wrote, and I feel like any policy from the Biden administration on Iran will be corrupted by China. We've talked about this a lot. The Chinese influence, the Biden administration with the CIA director being basically on China's payroll. They were funding so much of his work through these institutes they've got in the U.S. and the money that they've invested in these benign-sounding American think tanks that are funding a lot of the research from those on the left. And so they are very they'll criticize all these other countries for human rights violations, but a country that's literally running concentration camps for Muslims, and they speak up. They don't speak up at all. So how much influence do you think, Than, China has on the Biden administration when it comes to Iran? I think China has influence basically probably in every major foreign policy decision right now.
Here's what we know, Jordan. China wants to have major influence on every significant foreign, and I would add domestic to that. Every domestic U.S. policy, they want to have influence in. They're, they can view themselves as the main competitor to the United States in the global marketplace, both for economics and then also for larger societal issues. So, Jordan, I think ties to China and Chinese influence in Biden administration officials, quite honestly, should be one of their very highest criteria. And I will tell you, probably no place is it more important than in the intelligence space. So the idea that there's a nominee right now, Bill Burns, who's going to lead the intelligence apparatus for the Biden administration that is getting millions of dollars that are really direct payments from the Chinese government. They go through essentially Chinese-owned corporations. That is dramatically concerning to me. And I can't answer your question about how great the scope is, but if the director or the nominee to be the director of the CIA has those type of ties, probably tells you everything you need to know.
Folks, again, we've covered a lot today. We've covered Comey and this new smoking gun about knowing that it wasn't corroborated, knowing it wasn't verified, then signing off on the Steele dossier to a FISA court that it was verified. We know John Durham is still in place, that Joe Biden didn't remove him as special counsel. Got a new lawsuit against Donald Trump. The Democrats just can't quit him from a Democrat congressman about January 6th. So again, the lawfare against former President Trump continues. Many of us are on that president's personal legal team and looking at so many of this lawfare that's coming against the president. This Iran issue, that they are taking actions which have no civilian purpose. This hard uranium and using that as kind of developing that substance that has no civilian purpose whatsoever. And even the JCPOA current members are saying that. But the Biden administration rushing in for a deal. We've taken your questions about some of the impeachment stuff as well. Let me encourage you, share this with your friends and family. This is our live broadcast for today. Of course, if there was some major breaking news, the great thing is we've got the capability, as you can see right now, to come and join you at any time, at any moment, through Facebook, through Periscope, through YouTube, and of course through Twitter as well that way. So share this with your friends and family. Thank you for joining us today. If you are like me and part of that country that is snowed and iced in, stay warm, stay safe if you have to travel on the roads. If you are one of those folks that's got to be out at work, maybe in the hospitals or an emergency worker, we pray for all of you to stay safe as you have to make your ways to work. And we will talk to you next time on Sekulow.